So let me say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those in various places of the world who found some time to join us and share their views, experience with regard to dialogue. And let me underline that according to my belief and also to the belief of the co-organizers, this is the Cultures Interactive and the Nansen Academy, dialogue should become one of the universal tools and the guarantees that diverse and confrontational values could be harmonized, and by that dialogue could effectively contribute to maintaining or establishing peace, preventing and halting conflicts, war, rise of hatred and hate speech, and ultimately mass violences at both international and national levels. We all agree that given the shaping new world order and the rise of populism and nationalism, which are based on confrontational approach, there is a need to make a shift towards a dialogically focused international community and society. I think in this circle, I should not elaborate on the challenges stemming from diverse identities and values from polarizing political discourse. These are shared challenges we face regardless of the political system we live in, and the shared challenges, however, oblige us to also share the responsibility for creating conditions and circumstances which could effectively counter the risks and the threats. We, the organizers of this and the previous webinars, are convinced that culture of dialogue should become an organic part of our daily lives, the governance, the decision-making procedures, and education. And there is a growing need for expertise in consensus-building processes, mitigating conflict situations, and disseminating public participation approach. Should we want to be efficient, indeed, our efforts must be concentrated and focused. We may not work and act isolatedly. Our community may not remain fragmented. The expertise and experience must be collected and made easy accessible for anybody who wishes to increase her knowledge and expertise. And that is the main aim of our initiative when we organize these webinars and provide space for dialogue practitioners and obviously for also scholars to conduct dialogue on the ways forward and the tasks ahead of us in this domain. Our first webinar, nearly half a year ago, aimed to set the frame for joint reflection, brainstormings, and awareness raising. That time we focused on how hatred could be overcome and what experience dialogue practitioners had in various parts and regions of the world in that context. Today, we continue the share of best practices, whereas we focus partly on activities, challenges, and tasks in democracies. We also try to hear the practitioners who work in political field and who have collected experience in mediating between conflicting political approaches. We shall also give the floor today for a practitioner who, beyond some success, however, will also speak about the significance of dialogue efforts in our neighborhood in Ukraine, where the difficulties for launching dialogue and stopping the war are enormous. And ultimately, I will make some remarks to the statement drafted by some of us with the aim to advance the cause of dialogue and enhance the international dialogue community. We planned that as dialogue practitioners, we should act today in dialogue manner. We need to speak openly and frankly about the dilemmas, difficulties, feasibility of our plans, all together to jointly reflect on issues bothering all of us. I do invite you, therefore, that after each input, feel free to pose any questions, make any comments and proposals, and please act in a dialogic model. And right now, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, to one of the co-organizers of this event to Harald Weinböck. Harald works as a practitioner and as a researcher of good practice methods in prevention and rehabilitation in school and prison settings, and also he's focusing on right-wing extremism, of course, on prevention of right-wing extremism. He studied and worked in the US, France, Switzerland, and Germany. He received his PhD at the University of California in Los Angeles, and his professional degree in Leipzig. He is completed training in group dynamic psychotherapy, and he is a licensed psychotherapist. He co-founded this the Cultures Interactive, this NGO, in 2005, and since then he is very active in the field of the prevention of extremism. And since 2011, he is also an activist in the network in building up the EU's radicalization awareness network. My last sentence to present him, he has himself developed the so-called dialogical approach of narrative group work in schools. Harald, the floor is yours. Right now, Harald will be speaking about dialogue, about the skills of dialogue, and to how to promote democracy through dialogue, and what are the pitfalls of this concept in our environment. Harald, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Georgie. A pleasure to be here. Next time, and I will always be here, Georgie, naturally. Next time I have an official role, we have to cut down on my biography. Okay. The older we get, the longer. No, it doesn't need to. But thanks for the reference also to the concept of preventing violent extremism. I will share a few thoughts on that. But first of all, I want to share another observation. I take great pleasure to be here. Really, I do. And there's a specific reason for that, aside of our long year cooperation. This alliance of dialogue is really a civil society initiative, and the reason why I emphasize that is that at least looking around here in Germany. And knowing that civil society is something very important for democracies. This is why we talk about lively civil societies to have various functions and to participate in the practice of democracy. If I actually look around my colleagues and myself and my NGO in Germany, genuine civic society organizations and initiatives are hard to come by. I mean, mostly we're doing it for professional reasons. It's also our profession. And so there is hardly any volunteer-based activity as we share here on an international level. I much appreciate that. But that's just a side note. I had this lunch. I wanted to share that with you. Coming to the what I want to do with my 10 minutes here is actually to speak about also critically, not about dialogue at all, because I think culture of dialogue and is something that really needs to be supported, and I'm fully with you, but about the concept of prevention and the concept of extremism, because our funding mostly in Germany, and many colleagues also in Central and Eastern Europe, I know, that the funding comes from sources that are inspired by much concern about violent extremism, be it right-wing extremism, be it so-called Islamism, which is of course very understandable, but in some respects, and with that I share my 3 or 4 slides, I don't have any more, there is actually a few risks with that, and this is the basic point that I'd like to make, sort of cautioning us on a conceptual and theoretical level. Now you see by my title already, I'm really truly in favor of dialogue, and dialogue. I think we all have a shared sense of what it means and how it means also relationship building, among citizens, and basically at the end supporting and and also buttressing democratic society, and want to make the case for almost replacing the concept of extremism. And to be true, as an NGO, we actually try to increasingly in our language get rid of the term extremism, and while getting the funding from that area, get rid of the term extremism, and also to a certain extent of the term prevention. And yes, and that is the reference to the current European project that I'm getting my funding from, which is has still the term extremism in its title, but at the same time, and I will explain that a bit later, tries to get rid of it, or at least make it much softer, much more flexible than it is. The project is called Opportune, which is attuning oppositional extremism. And the second half of the title is much more important, that there is social dialogue, which is sort of the new paradigm that helps us to deal with forms of opposition that are problematic. Let me put it this way, because I really want to do without the term extremism as much as I can. Problematic, not so constructive ways of opposition, and that's, I think, what we practitioners all share. Trying to actually bank on that, use that, and also invigorate that, but also mediate it. And then our key tool for that is dialogue, and here it's called social dialogue, for instance. If I really want to make the case to argue for a logic of dialogue as opposed to a logic of extremism and prevention, and also make concrete distinctions, then I would claim that dialogue actually builds bridges and connections, and the logic of extremism or preventing extremism, as all abbreviations are PVE, preventing violent extremism, or CVE, countering, and that logic of activity, it intercepts, it fights, it counters. That's the lingo usually. It looks out for dangers and enemies. And how important that might be for security agencies, I think our task is a different one. We are practitioners of dialogue, relationship building, and so forth. And I think we need to have a clear sense of that we have to be separate from what also has come to be an industry, the industry of prevention, preventing violent extremism. That's what I mentioned here as a change of paradigm. If I here suggest to speak about a systematic attempt to avoid the term extremism, then there's a particular German connotation to it, and I really, we all agree in Germany that we should do that, but actually it is not so easy to explain, and this is what I'm going to do in this little exercise to you. I'm going to explain to you in 4 or 5 or 6 points why we should not embark on a logic of extremism prevention, but rather use the paradigm of dialogue and relationship building, because, and that's my first point, is a very German point, extremism, it is in Germany and Europe, it's particularly in Germany, it's associated with what we call here the horseshoe theory. You might have never heard that. I explain that, horses, and horses run, and they have hoofs, and the piece of iron that's put on the horseshoe, it's shaped like that. And with horseshoe theory, we mean that theory on extremism that's been around for decades in Germany, that always equals right-wing extremism with left-wing extremism. And to make that clear, what that means for people like me in Germany, and for thousands of practitioners, that we've been working under the verdict or the suspicion that while we actually try to support democracy, security agencies look at us as a possible threat of left-wing extremists. So it's probably also true for other countries in Europe, but I think that the theory is with us here very much, and therefore also the critical view on the concept of extremism. It's just highly politicized, and which is why we really try to get rid of it. Also because it is, the right-wing, left-wing opposition let me make that point really, is not only unfair or inappropriate or unhelpful. I would even claim, and I'm not alone by that, in Germany, there for the last 2 decades or 3, there has not been such a thing like left-wing extremism in the literal sense in any way that would compare to right-wing extremism, because left activism is all for the constitution, is all for human rights, and right-wing extremism is not. So there's a couple of fundamental problems with that, which is why we stay away from that view. The second case, the second argument that I give, the second reason for avoiding the term extremism, and by doing so also the term prevention to a certain extent, is that looking at extremes, supposed extremes, makes us forget to look at ourselves, which is sort of the assumed mainstream, the presumable normal, yeah, as a potential problem. And I think that is something that the culture of dialogue, as I understand it, has very much a self-reflective view on myself, on ourselves, and on the extent to which we might actually be part of the problem. Yeah. And therefore we have in the Opportune project, we're trying to fool around with the concept like everyday extremism, which is a very funny one, because something that's every day and everyone cannot possibly be extreme, because what would normal be if every day is extremism? So that shows you that even in countries, and that's UK, where the extremism debate is not such a big thing, there is the need and the urge, or the wish to get beyond that. The third point why I would claim that extremism is an unfortunate concept, that it has proven to be useless in any scientific respect. So that's a quite strong word. I could also say it is unhelpful would be a nicer word to be used here, but it is really that sort of a common sense observation among researchers and the academia around here, that extremism just doesn't, there's no way of defining that. It has not been successful. Any attempts to do that has not been successful. So something that you cannot really describe and define, you cannot research. So the question is up, why use that? Whereas I think in terms of dialogue and process of dialogue and communication of that, this is something you can research. It's, in a sense, you can describe it, you can analyze it, and you can draw conclusions from it. So researchers can actually deal with it, which I think is a very important point in our favor. And that's something that it's probably for another time, Jyoti, another 10-minute input at another month and year. There is alternative concepts around here in Germany, quite frequent, and people do know these concepts. I know, Jyoti, you're familiar with it, but hardly any colleagues in Europe are. Group-focused hatred, group-focused enmity is one concept. The concept of authoritarianism. These are not only words, they're actually empirical concepts where you have decades of research on them. That's just as a side note. And I think the concept of dialogue fits much better in there as a contrast than anywhere else. The other thing that's funny with the term extremism, and the reason to really be cautious with it, while it is useless or unhelpful in scientific terms, it yet proliferates. So you have in the security agencies and in policy bodies, you have this tendency to over and over define subtypes of so-called extremism, which of course multiply the problem, because they are only operational terms that do not really help you in analytic questions, and they tend to generate discrimination, as we are well aware through the Islamism debate and all the problems that come with a specific term. Another reason to be cautious is the fact that that extremism as a concept divides up in different subtypes of extremisms, and then places subtypes against each other politically, they deflect from the fact that once you think about good practice, what to actually do about it, which is dialogue practically, is a very cross-phenomenal thing. So the method with which you try to work with the challenge is actually quite similar across all types of so-called extremism, which yet is another reason to get rid of the logic of extremism. Give you some references here if you want to read up on that. And of course, another thing that the extremism term and the prevention term does, it suggests wrongly that ideology plays a decisive role. Now, if you say Islamism, then you say basically that, no, I mean, there's the religion or the ideology of this ism, the Islamism is the problem. Even better example is right-wing extremism, and the neo-Nazi ideology is a problem, which we practitioners have known all along. It's more the non-ideological factors like your biographical background, your experiences, your psychosocial background, all these things that play a much bigger role in the question of whether you get onto this streak of life or not and how to get out of it. The last point, but probably the most important, is that you might have wondered by that time that if extremism is so unhelpful, well, where the heck does it come from? And you might know that, but it is, or you might not know that, but extremism and the whole logic of it really comes out of security agencies. It is, and it's even there, it's not really a firm terminology, but it's just how they write their intelligence reports. And we have practically adopted the logic of intelligence reports on our logic of working with people in relationship and dialogue, and just this doesn't fit together. Because the logic of looking out for imminent dangers and dangerous people is not the logic that we apply once we set the goal in getting into contact and building dialogue. And that is basically a reference to, and I should close here then, to a challenge that I think have, with the logic of dialogue, we have a good answer to, and therefore I really have the wish that we progress and that we develop well as an alliance, that the challenge of securitization, that we ever more areas of education and social work and even psychotherapy get onto a security lens and are made to be a function, or at least the tendency is there to make therapy and education a function of security agencies, that we are basically always have to be on the guard that this doesn't take over, and remind people that what we really have to do as human beings and as democratic societies is to get in contact. And we do that, of course, by means of dialogue. And here in brackets, the British Prevent Duty and the German Joint Cases Conferences, that would be a separate talk to be given, where this very important line within democratic societies between what is education, social services, and what is security work, it really needs to be kept very clear and very tight, so that we don't get confused, because otherwise fundamental rights are undermined, and the most important division of functions and powers in democracies are undermined as well. That's probably a good. I have 2 more slides, which I just jumped because I'm already over my 10 minutes, Georgie. I think I just cut it here. I hope that was not too dense, but I meant to give you the perspective of also where I come from. The last 20 years of funding, comes from preventing violent extremism, and I think we've come a long way, recognizing that we need different terms, and I think the terms that we need is dialogue. I have a couple of others. This is my last slide. You see what I think that is the logic of terminology that the 3 of us and our colleagues, I think, are anchored in. Mediation, dialogue, diplomacy, group work, narrative group work, and I hope and wait to see, peace building, of course, conflict management, I hope in a way to see that this line gets longer and that we collect ever more colleagues, groups, and methodologies that are in support of what we aim to achieve for democracy by working in an alliance of dialogue. And that will be my last sentence for now, Jyoti. Okay. And I hand back to you.
Thank you very much. I think that was useful for everybody to get an insight into the system and perception in a liberal democracy, how this extremism is tackled, handled, perceived, and the connections between these activities and the activities of dialogue, facilitation of dialogue, building capacities of dialogue are important things and tasks which will have to be carried out. I wonder, the time is, as usual, time is running, but if you do have, because I promised that I will provide the floor for even 1-2 questions, and Harald will promise that his response will be shorter, then please raise your hands, and then we shall give you the floor if somebody has. If you don't have this, you could also later on pose this question at any time. Feel free. Okay, if you don't have the questions, then let me give now the floor to Mr. Mario Giro, who is a new colleague for me, if I may say it, Mario, that colleague, somebody who is has been working very hard in the field of dialogue, within the framework of the community Sant'Egidio, and since 1975, and in the mid-80s he began to get engaged in the interreligious dialogue, especially with dialogue with the Muslim world. Since 1989, he has been working in Africa for development of the community of Sant'Egidio in Côte d'Ivoire and Cameroon. And then in 2012, he has got the advisor of the Minister for International Cooperation and Integration in Italy. And afterwards, 1 year later, he got the Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs. And between 2016 and 2018, he was the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Italy. And during his activities, he took part in numerous peace initiatives in Algeria, Kosovo, Liberia, Central African Republic. He was also participated in Albania and Kosovo in the peace negotiations. And he also, in 2006, he participated in several missions as a mediator in South Sudan. So he has a rather rich experience in the field of, he says, I am a mediator, but I think that once you try to mediate between conflicting views and political parties, then this is probably sometimes mixed also with some dialogue activities. Nevertheless, it will be interesting to hear his experience, to hear his views from the point of view, from the perspective of a mediator, how he looks dialogue and what sort of experience he has collected during his rich career. Mario, the floor is yours, and thank you very much that you have accepted our invitation.
Thank you, Georg. Thank you to all of you. I will try to remain in my 10 or 15, don't remember, 15 you told me, minutes, okay. However. Yes, I am a non-institutional mediator, in the sense that Sant'Egidio is a faith-based international organization that is involved in poverty, fight against poverty, interreligious dialogue, helping work with the young people, with elder people, etc., and also in trying to resolve or to help to resolve armed conflict, violent conflict. This has not been prepared at the beginning in the 80s. It's something that we met in our activities, and at a certain point became one of the activity of the most famous activity of the community, even if not the most numerous, because we are not involved in a big number. We are a little group of 20 people that is involved particularly in this track 2 diplomacy, I may say. We were involved in, I can read you the list: Lebanon, Mozambique, Algeria, Guatemala, Albania, Kosovo, Burundi, Bosnia, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Darfur, Northern Uganda, Guinea-Conakry, Niger, Libya, Senegal, Casamance, Central African Republic, and South Sudan, and now Chad. Not all our activities have been successful. Of course, it's difficult. It's a particularly path, and I have been asked by Georgi to explain to you, which is my view in a personal experience about what is the effectiveness of dialogue. Of course, we are in front, considering the war and the conflicts, into new scenarios, particularly privatization of war. For example, Wagner. Wagner is a form of privatization of war, but the contractors have been invented by Western countries, United States in particular. Then it's not a new thing, considering, for example, Iraq. And also a kind of fragmentation of violence. For example, consider Kivu, in which there are 200 of militias. It's very difficult to understand who is killing who and who is warring for who. And those are hybrid and atypical conflicts that have to do, that are linked to failed states, of course, and are very challenging. Track 1 diplomacy, that means official and professional diplomacy, sometimes has not all the tools necessary to confront this kind of situation, because you have to be patient, you need a lot of time, you have to go in contact with people that are considered terrorists or out of law, and then it's difficult for a minister staying, or a vice minister. I was also vice minister, I know what it is about. It's difficult for an official, also an ambassador, to wait in a bush for weeks, as it happened to me when I met Joseph Kony, considered the devil at that time. And also, it's difficult to meet some people, because as a former ICRC General Secretary said, but you are shaking hands with bloods. Yes, I have to wash my hands several times a day, because this is the case. About Sant'Egidio, track 1 or track 2? In my opinion, track 1.5. Because you need institutions, and you need the official, the guarantee of the institutions and the governments, and you need also the flexibility of the civil society. You have the necessity to put all together. When we mediate for the Mozambican war, 2 years and 27 months of mediation, we involved as observers also United States, France, UK, and also people that we don't like South Africa of the apartheid. The Minister Pikbota was there at the last months of the negotiation, because it was better to have them inside than to have them as a spoiler outside. That is also, considering that also is a form of political choice that you have to do when it comes to that kind of I say track 1.5 diplomacy that put together institutional and not institutional. UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali at that time defined this like an Italian formula. I quote him: The community of Sant'Egidio worked discreetly for years to make the parties to meet. It cultivated its contacts. It was particularly effective in involving others to contribute to a solution. It implemented its techniques characterized by confidentiality and informality in tune with the official work of governments and intergovernmental organizations like United Nations, of course. On the basis of the Mozambican experience, the term Italian formula was created to describe this original mix of governmental and non-governmental peace building. The respect for the parties at war and those involved in the field is crucial for the success of this kind of work, unquote. This was also inside the agenda for peace in 2000. It was another era, and we have to consider that now things are more and more difficult, because at that time it was a fashion to go to peace building, peace mediation. Now we are in a situation in which war, we came back. We went back to the idea spread in our particularly in our Western world, that war can solve. But we know that wars cannot solve anything. What is going on in among Palestinians and Israelis, what is going, all the Gulf wars or Afghanistan or whatever, there is no solution. Even if you take this from a military point of view, there is no solution with war. But unfortunately, our nowadays culture has came back to the idea that war is a solution. I think, of course, we are completely against this kind of ideas. At that time, it was different. And in the 90s, it was different. There were a lot of international efforts, a lot of also organizations that tried to establish activities in the field of peace building, mediations, facilitation, etc. Now there are very few. There is no glory in that kind of field, and a lot of failures, in general speaking. Track to mediation do not have the power of force and of intervention, of course, to force their intervention. They need the ascension, the yes of the warring parties before doing something. And I think that a non-threatening mediation is good, because it's the best thing to do, because when you try to impose something, in general, you fail. Of course, you have to be tuned, to fine-tune with the reality of the field, and this is why it's very important to give the responsibility of a mediation to the parties, and to have work a presence like facilitation or mediators very, very light, even transparent, because you cannot take the place of the people that are at war. You have to understand their way to see the war, their auto-comprehension of the war, of the conflict, but you cannot substitute to put in their place, at their place, so you cannot be a substitute. And this is, of course, not very gratifying, generally speaking, for someone who wants to make it the mediation like a profession. Because there is you cannot program. You cannot have a program when you start. It's like a path that you don't know how it will go. If parties will agree, you can have a lot of obstacles. Then you cannot, for example, for financing those kind of activities, make some programs with all the output and the objectives and the chronology, etc., etc. One very important thing is synergy. Synergy is very important, because you have to avoid any kind of competition in the field of mediation. This is important, particularly when you have different subjects. For example, consider Sudan today. Now there are IGAD, that is the regional, against the United States that wants to have a role, against Saudi Arabia as well, to have a role, etc. And those different mediators are competing among themselves. Of course, they are not, the responsibility of the current war is not to those organizations or states, but competition is not a good thing when you are trying to find a common path of dialogue. This is something that is very important. And you have also to consider that there is not only a problem of resources, oil, water, whatever, it's also a question of pathology of memory. Because when you have people that are at war, particularly internal war or civil wars, it's not only a question of resources. Resources are important to continue war, to make a war permanent, but are not the explanation of the war. If that was the explanation, it would be very simple to stop the wars, that kind of conflict. This is important because we have the mentality, this is an oil war, this is a chocolate war, this is a water war, and to find something objective outside of the perception of who are at war. And this, and you have to understand also the psychology of rebellions, for example. But now, for example, you have very important changes. In Central African Republic, there is one organization of rebellion, one rebel group, whose chief is a rebel warrior, lord of war in Central African Republic, but opened in Dubai an agency of security provider. This is kind of strange hybrid situation in which you can privatize war and conflict as a good that you are selling on the market of security. And security is something very, very asked. There is an important market and trade about security nowadays. The importance of flexibility, I quoted already, only to add that it's also a matter of patience. And patience is not a moral quality, patience is a political tool. Because when you are working with people that have their own perception of the conflict, you have to ask to listen a lot to understand, and you are tempted to be fed up very quickly. But at the end of the day, listening to the same story again and again, there is an element added at the end of the same story every time. And it's important not to look to success at any cost. You have to be prepared, this is also the quality of dialogue, to fail. To say, no, dear friends, you are joking or you are playing games. I'm not here to follow you forever, but I am very patient. But at the same time, if you don't want, you are not interested in that, I have other things to do. Thank you very much. This is also the strength of Sant'Egidio, because we are all volunteers and we are not living on that. And this is very important because we don't give per diem, and we go not to the people involved in mediations. The Burundi mediation that was mediated by Nyerere and Mandela, big mediation paid by the Western countries. There are on an area in Bujumbura that is called Arusha, the place of mediation in Kenya, because there was, all the houses was made by the per diem paid, and this kind of per diem prolonged the talks a lot at that time in the 90s. However, a more transparent and not threatening mediators is also someone that has no hidden agenda. It's very difficult to mediate with a country that is neighbor country when the crisis here, because, or a big power. A big power is important as guarantor, but is not very welcome like a mediator or facilitator, because he's suspected to have an hidden agenda, an interest in the mediation. That's why dialogue can be a political tool that can solve conflicts. I'm convinced, I have the proof because I made it, but also is something related to reconciliation. Peace agreement is one thing, reconciliation is another thing. Peace agreement can be political and involving also only the warring parties, big political parties, in some case also organized civil society. Reconciliation involves all the society. It's a matter of cohesion, social cohesion, and it's something that can last for years. Then when you reach an agreement, you can sign it, it's signed, very good, but you have to continue to stay. Then there is an adoption of a situation that you have to be involved in. You cannot pass from one situation to another, popping out from one another situation. You have to maintain the presence, because reconciliation is a long process that involves all society, and particularly the victims that in some mediation are not listened, but they can be listened in a process of reconciliation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renzo, Mario. That was very interesting, at least for me, to hear about the difficulties, and about also to hear the frank and open declaration that unfortunately sometimes you cannot succeed. And for me, it was also an important message which underlines my and our conviction that, of course, mediation could last for a while if people respect the agreement reached by mediation, but that doesn't mean that people have reconciled with each other and have made peace, which is a much longer process and also lasts much longer. I think that this was a very good, I'd say, also introduction for what Steinar has prepared, coming from right now back from Ukraine, or working in also in Ukraine to arrange, establish dialogue process there. We speak about the results and success and fiasco of dialogue. But let me also say a few words about him. He's got his basic education focusing on cultural dialogue between Europe and the United States, and he wrote his PhD on the Americanization of Norwegian culture. He works at the Nansen Academy in Norway, which is located in Lillehammer, and he has built up the so-called Nansen Dialogue Network, which has invited potential leaders from ex-Yugoslavia, and over more than 3,000 people from ex-Yugoslavia have visited Nansen Academy. He has facilitated more than 200 seminars, and so he has a rather rich experience in this field. And recently he started some dialogue and reconciliation between Russia and Ukraine. And just coming back, he has a very rich experience in Bosnia and Herzegovina about dialogue, but this time he will most likely focus on the situation and the challenges in Ukraine and in that context. So, Steinar, the floor is yours. Unmute. Okay.
Thank you, Tatar. Thank you for the invitation. And I have to modify a little bit introduction, because I started to get involved in Ukraine around after the fire in Odessa in 2014, May 2014. And the reason I got involved was that I work at the Nansen Academy. And when Nansen won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1922, he gave actually half the money to Ukraine and Russia. People in Norway said, "Are you crazy, giving money to the Bolsheviks?" And Nansen answered, "No, I'm supporting people that starved after a war." And in the spirit of Nansen, the speech that he gave when he received the prize is called No More War. And the last year and a half, I have been extremely frustrated with the fact that we have not done more to stop the war in Ukraine. And the big question is it because we are unable to do it, or are there forces that somehow want to prolong it? And when Mario said it looks as if some people believe that war can solve problems, well, yes, it looked like that, you know, during Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq. But do we still believe that now we are helping people in Ukraine? So by continuing the war, there will be a better life at the end of the road, when the current suffering, not only on individuals, but the current suffering in terms of even believing in a future. Many of the people that leave, they will have trouble with returning. And this is what I've been working on the last 25 years in the Western Balkan. The millions of refugees from Bosnia and Herzegovina, millions of refugees, you know, from the whole area. A journalist called me this morning and said, do you have any kind of memories from 1993 that I can relate to Ukraine today? And I said, well, in 1993, the father of the current head of NATO, Thorvald Stoltenberg, he presented, together with David Owen, the Owen-Stoltenberg plan. And that plan was rejected. They had 2 more years of war. And then the Dayton Agreement was approved. The point is, the difference between the Stoltenberg-Owen plan and the Dayton Agreement is so small that can you justify 2 more years, including Srebrenica, in order to somehow... So the question is, why wasn't the Stoltenberg-Owen plan accepted? Answer you often get is people couldn't stop the war at that moment. They had sacrificed too much. They were too deep into the war. It was meaningless to sit down and agree almost on the solution they went to war to avoid. But today, 30 years later, they still struggle with the consequences of this. I will go fast through some slides because they will now be part of the recording, and some of the arguments I have, I'm connecting to a very fundamental, visible conflict in Europe, which is hidden behind nationalism, ethnicity, and that's the conflict between traditionalism and modernity. Secondly, in the current war in Ukraine, we're starting again to talk very much about country and people as very strong nation states, something we stopped doing in Europe in the last century. It's impossible today to talk about the Norwegian state. Norway is a state for citizens of Norway, including people from all over the world. So is it meaningful to use these concepts? Ukrainians, Russians, Americans, Germans, Canadians. And I understand that even sitting here talking about the war in Ukraine, when I am a Norwegian sitting safely, it is almost, provocative, because what do I know? What have I experienced? When I traveled in 2014, I realized that there was a relevance in the experience that I had from the Western Balkans. And when I showed a movie that actually Jon, who's watching here today, made, that movie had 2 voices, a Serb voice, Albanian voice. And the audiences in Ukraine said, thanks God, we are not Balkan, but this is very relevant. It was relevant in 2014 because it had the two voices and the society was in a way polarized. So the work that I did in terms of bringing people from Ukraine and Russia together started in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, then pretty much stopped. Because as the conflict intensified, dialogue became more and more difficult. And that's kind of the core of my talk today, to explain why it is so difficult. We should respect that. And there's no way we can overrun. At the same time, I have a very good friend. I discussed with her a lot. We disagree on many, many things. And she says, it's okay for me to talk with you, Steinar. I disagree with you, but I'm in the middle of it. I am so agitated. I'm so angry. I'm so hateful. I don't want to have any kind of dialogue. But I realize that you have a helicopter view. And what you see can also be useful in terms of the conversation, in terms of the dialogue. So let me go a little bit. Can you see the, yes?
Yes, it's okay.
We really believed in the 20th century, and it's what Benedict Anderson, he calls it imagined communities. We started to believe that we lived in nations. And it was not because we knew everybody, but the development of media, technology, transportation made it possible. The radio, the newspapers, somehow we understood other people in our same country, we have something together. And without that kind of imagined community, there is no way you can, let's say, die for a nation. So the development of the nation state was important for Europe in the 19th century. But my question, of course, is the nation state useful today? And before I say more, I just want to separate three ways of talking. We talk about facts. That's the things we kind of agree that happened. Then we have our assumptions. My assumptions are based on my knowledge, my experience, but some of my assumptions are wrong. And every time they're corrected, I'm glad. But I also have speculations. They're often needed, but they are also often, wrong. So I will try to at least tell you when I'm speculating and when I really assume based on experiences. Based on my experience with dialogue in the Western Balkans, the interethnic dialogue managed to break down the ethnic principle as a way of organizing our lives. And it was because Croats, Serbs, Bosniaks came together for 3 months. The first month it was fighting, it was about history, about who shot first, who's to blame, who's guilty. But over time, new constellations started to shape. And this discussion, is nationalism a creative cultural construct? Or is it in our genes? Is Norwegianness something we developed that we separated from Denmark? Then every national painter was painting mountains because there were no mountains in Denmark. So then we could show that we were really different from them. You need to have a door opener to start mediation dialogue. And our door opener into Sarajevo was the fact we were Olympic City. Our door opener into Ukraine was Fridtjof Nansen because of his enormous work, particularly after World War I, and he's most famous for the Nansen passport. It's kind of interesting, the Nansen passport concept, because he tells us this is a travel document. Many people, 100,000, were without a travel document. So when he gave the passport, he didn't give them, let's say, a citizenship. He gave them a passport Today, passports are becoming important in conflicts. So let's say in Kosovo, I often suggest, why can't, if people really want to have both the Serbian passport and the Kosovo passport, what's the very big deal? I actually do know some people in Europe, they have 6 passports. What is the legacy after Nansen? Help people when we can all make a difference. The never-ending story, don't say something is hopeless or impossible. The impossible just takes a little longer. Don't accept that war is inevitable. If we can start them, we can stop them. No more war. The Nansen program for Ukraine in Norway, it's $7.5 billion. $7.5 billion. That's the Nansen program. The man said no more war, but we have no ideas about how this war is going to end, which was the problem when we also were involved in Libya and Afghanistan. We had no idea about how to end the war. We just pulled out both places and left war and chaos. So now, what would Fridtjof Nansen have said if he knew that his name was used in our support, which is weapons and money and not any kind of strategic thinking? Well, I know very well that most Ukrainian politicians, they would say, this is up to us. We must make decisions about how we will use this money and how we will end the war. We have to do the job. But is it also a way for us to avoid the responsibility for the consequences? When we say, out of loyalty to Ukraine, we will not tell them what to do. The only thing actually I think we're telling them is to at least try to buy some Norwegian ammunition. A basic dialogue seminar was always about what shaped you, what formed you, who are you today? Who are the people who influenced you? Which books, movies? It's what Hal called the more biographical background. And how is the conflict affecting your life? So these seminars we were then having in 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, with Russians from Petersburg, Moscow, other places, and with the Ukrainians. It was the relationship building, living together, that was the strong part. Not necessarily the conversation, but the fact that they discovered each other as human beings. We used the Dessler's methodology to discuss underlying causes of the war, triggers of the war, individual political actors, and catalysts, that which keeps the war going. And it was very clear that the underlying causes of the war is one thing. What keeps the war going is something else. And in these groups with Ukrainians and Russians, we also had people from Balkan. And in one of the years, I see Josh Nadar from Canada here. He was a participant in one of the summer seminars. I am very sad that this ended. And although I do understand the value and the need of somehow separating oneself from communicating with those responsible for the pain and the complete invasion of one's own country. So why don't we embrace dialogue? In extreme conflicts, we don't want to recognize our enemies. So to be part of dialogue is some kind of respect and honor I really don't feel. I remember inviting Palestinian documentary filmmakers, Israeli documentary filmmakers, to come and show their movies to each other. It was only women. And the Palestinian women said, no, we won't, we will not, because it's gonna be some kind of recognition we don't have. And I said, well, but this is just, dialogue. No, we don't want dialogue. We don't want dialogue. I'm sitting with them for quite some time. And I explain, well, I just want you to show your movies so they can learn about your reality. And they said, is that dialogue? They thought dialogue was at Camp David, negotiations about the conflict itself. And then, wow, if we can show our movies, then we will come. But please, don't call it dialogue. And I didn't call it dialogue. We called it other voices, listen to other voices. And they came and they showed each other the movies and they learned about each other's lives. To engage in dialogue is like sleeping with the enemy. You are a traitor. One diplomat said to me, problem with dialogue, Steinar, it's too womanish. It's what women do. And everybody who has been involved in dialogue know that dialogue can be very tough. It can be very controversial. And I would say probably in most of my dialogue seminars, it has been like maybe 80% debate. You cannot avoid debate. Dialogue doesn't lead to solutions. That's partly true. It doesn't lead to solutions, but it does lead to a better understanding that can help find solutions. Although if a husband and wife have a week of honest dialogue, they might end up with saying, I understand you better, but I don't want to live with you anymore. Bye-bye. Or self-righteousness makes us look at dialogue as waste of time. We know what the others are going to say, or we are simply not interested. There are positions that without doubt are right. It's only a liberal relativeness that can argue that there are competing truths. In other words, the cancellation culture. Many people believe they cancel religious views, they cancel political views, which is really probably what Harald in the old days would call so extremist that they're not worthy of our attention. In addition, listening to those people might poison our soul and our heart. Can dialogue be counterproductive under conflict? And the issue has been forcefully raised by a coalition of dialogue and mediation groups in Ukraine. And there are several arguments, but the main argument, as I understand it, again, I might be wrong, is that to engage an aggressive invader in such a way legitimizes and show a respect the invader doesn't deserve. And in addition, talking too much about dialogue mediation in a time of war can simply take the attention away from the necessary military defense. A second powerful argument is that international experts seldom have good enough local knowledge. It can therefore be both a solid mistake, but also a humbling experience when foreigners enter into some process, coming and saying, hey, what you guys need is just more dialogue. There is no way that you can force dialogue upon anyone. And I don't think that's even our, that's not our intention. But there are experiences that transcend, let's say, this nation building. There are issues that we all are struggling with. I'll give an example. One of my good Nansen colleagues, his name is Bojan Glavašević. His father is a war hero from Croatia. And because the father is a war hero, that was probably one of the reasons he was also appointed to Deputy Minister of War Veterans. He says publicly that in the new democratic Croatia, all war victims have the same right for war compensation. After having said that, he needed a private bodyguard for 3 years. So democracy, what does it mean in the peaceful context? What is democracy in terms of freedom of speech and your mother tongue? That's an issue discussed in a lot of countries around the world. What is freedom of religion in a democracy? It's discussed in a lot of countries. So on this level, we can help each other. I don't think that I don't think that most dialogue workers can do that much in the conflict itself in Ukraine. That's very much up to the United States and to China. If they can agree on deciding to try to stop the war, they might succeed. Then afterwards, there is a lot of reconciliation work we can talk about. I will try to give us some time to discuss and talk. There is one more argument against dialogue with the oppressor that I have run into throughout my whole life, actually. And it's because I spent many, many years in the United States. I was very amazed and admired Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was inclusive and tried to reach the middle ground. So you had 1/3 supportive, you had 1/3 against, and Martin Luther King wanted to reach the middle ground to get changes in the whole society. He wanted one society for all, black and white, it doesn't matter. Then comes Black Power and simply says, if we are going to succeed in our liberation, we have to somehow exclude the civil rights people, because they don't understand how, even though they're supportive, they are carrying the oppressive mentality. They're helping us with things we absolutely can do ourselves, and their ideas about how to solve things doesn't always match what we are thinking. But we have internalized a respect for them, and we need to separate from them in order to find out our own liberation potential. That is an attitude, that's a strategy, and I can respect. But if the goal is one society for all, then that strategy must be very, very temporarily. The dialogue, this will be my final comment. There is a dialogue seminar I think is strongly needed. Too many conflicts, they turn into frozen conflicts. There is a danger that Russia-Ukraine is now almost there. It will be a very frozen conflict for years to come. I so much support Mario when he said, you cannot win a war. Armenia thought they won Nagorno-Karabakh in 1994. Then Azerbaijan comes back 26 years later and win it back. And what will happen in 20 years, we don't know. You cannot win a war. So could it be that the very concepts we use to understand the world we live in are outdated? We try to solve conflicts in the 21st century with concepts from the 19th century. So in the nation building of Europe, identity, ethnicity, territory, citizenship, statehood, borders, they were so important. But the world didn't modernize the way we expected. Instead, we've seen a revival of traditionalism in the 21st century. And I think we just have to sit down and dialogue about the very way we understand these concepts. And people from Middle East, Kosovo, Serbia, Ukraine, Spain, all over, creative minds to somehow find a better language to deal with the conflicts we seem at the moment unable to deal with. Let me say thank you and stop there. And I will leave, of course, all these slides I rushed by. Thank you for letting me talk to you.
Thank you very much. There were very interesting thoughts, ideas. It was not just about Ukraine or not just about the Balkans, but about the significance of dialogue as such, about the pitfalls of dialogue. And I think that it has also shown, particularly this last part, that yes, we may not handle the issues in the 21st century with the methodology of the 19th and 20th centuries. And I do think so that after so many crisis situations, probably we shall be able to develop and to give a push to the tool of dialogue. And I believe that this is already a tool of the 21st century. Although dialogue has been a tool for long centuries, for example, in Africa, where people just sat around trees, and then they started to discuss the tribes leaders just things. And that was a dialogue, actually. They wanted to understand each other. So we may not say, of course, that this is a 21st century tool, but we shall have to update it, and we shall have to collect the knowledge and collect the power and try to give a new push to the issue of dialogue. Although the time is very, very small, I will want to stop here before I will say a few words about the alliance of dialogue and about the state, about the draft statement, and ask some people, the participants, that this will our event will not be a professor-pupil setup. That do you have any question? Do you have any comment? Please feel free to say it, and then probably we shall stay here some minutes longer than planned, and then we shall have some time to also to discuss this statement about the alliance of dialogue. So please, the floor is yours. Whoever wishes to say, to make any comment or pose question to our people, please raise your hands. And Steinar, please stop your sharing your screen, if possible.
Yes.
So, Ambassador Liberata Mulamula, she is the member of the Board of Trustees and coming from Tanzania, and she is all the time a big friend of dialogue. Therefore, the floor is yours. Pose any question, Liberata, and welcome in our circle. Unmute you, please. We don't hear you.
Yeah, I really want to thank you, George, for this for organizing this platform dialogue. As you rightly said, it is in my DNA, dialogue. But I also wanted to thank the presenters. I've benefited a lot because there's every time you listen to others, you have something to learn. And I have many takeaways from the presentations that have been made. But I want to start with Mr. Harrod regarding the concept of extremism. I listened carefully, and I really wanted to really understand that, of course, in this part of the world, in our neighborhood, I come from Tanzania, we are seeing this form of so-called extremism. But then your narrative was trying to find a rightful concept of what extremism is all about. But then as I listened, I just got confused that what are we talking about here? It might be because, as they say, what is in the name? But we have this new phenomenon of so-called extremism. So how do we explain it? Because when you say you can replace it with other concepts, but the phenomenon remains. And our main preoccupation is how do we deal with this? This is where I wanted you to take us through beyond the concepts. I know, of course, most of the academicians will take a lot of time in trying to understand the concepts, but I really want to know, what do we consider this to be? Because when you talk of terrorism, they say, no, this is not terrorism, it's extremism. How do we tackle this? But on Mario Giro, of course, you have said it, and this is also what I have experienced as somebody who has participated in many of these peace talks. I agree with you one thing, that when you pay the conflicting parties at the negotiations, you pay them. It's like you are paying them to negotiate. And that has prolonged the negotiations. But let me put it to you again, that this money always comes from the West. I mean, we call them donors, partners, but they, at the same time, they're helping to keep them at the negotiation table. And also, for me, actually, what I always push is to have these negotiations take place within the countries of the conflicts. Because if you take them away, and of course for them it's always a pretext of security or what, this is where we find ourselves. You have to sustain them in big hotels, a lot of money, which could have been used in peace building efforts. So here I share with you that, but then what is the way out? Every time you have to go to Rome, they have to go somewhere, they have to go to Saudi Arabia. So this used a lot of resources to sustain those talks. But finally, listening also to Mr. Steiner, I think we need to be clear here. There is also an issue of concept, but also in practice. What is the difference between dialogue, negotiation, and mediation? Is it a combination of all? Is it either all? Is it what? Because from Mr. Steiner, he put it also well, that when he was trying to get the Palestinian women to participate in dialogue, they were not interested. But then when he explained that, no, you need to show your experiences, and then they understood. So I think we also among ourselves, we need to be clear. What are we talking about? Because when you get into negotiation, it's something else. You start with dialogue and then another stage, negotiation, mediation. So I'm putting all this just to show that this is a very complex area. And sometimes we tend not to understand ourselves, even understanding, are we in the mediation, are we in the negotiations, are we in the dialogue stage, is it staged, and so forth. So I thought I should share this with you. It's not actually questions, but I just want you to help me in trying to put everything, these concepts, and get ourselves to understand what we are talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liberata. So I give the floor now to the colleagues to give the answers immediately. Herald, you were the first one addressed. Please, just my request is, please, although the questions are very substantial, try to give some very short response. And Liberata, what we could do is that even later on we could connect you with the colleagues, and also with me, and we could make a further explanatory webinar in a smaller circle as well. So if you wish so. So, but Herald, right now the floor is yours.
Absolutely, Liberata. Many thanks for that. You're totally right. I can clarify in very short time. Apologies for maybe having been a bit confusing or academic even. What I was saying is, I hope pretty simple. If we are talking in a logic of extremism and prevention, then we are in a logic that counters, argues against, fights against, and does all these things. Now, once you're on the ground and trying to get things better for people, you're usually not very successful in doing that. Most of all, you won't reach those that don't tend to listen to you. So, for that we need our means of dialogue. And you're totally right. We have to be very clear when we just dialogue, which is a very rich experience, or we negotiate, or we do the mediation or conflict. Yeah. But I was just, and this is my last sentence, Georgie. My plea was to be cautious with all of these concepts that tend to be security issues like terrorism, extremism, radicalization, yeah, and switch over to what you underlined, Liberata. What the heck should I discuss about how to call the phenomenon? I want to know what to do with it. Yeah? And the concept of extremism does not help at all in leading us to methods what to do with it. That was the gist of what I was trying to say, and I agree. I said it a bit too complicated.
Thank you, Heraldo. Mario, please.
Yes, thank you for the question, Ambassador Muramola. We know each other, of course, when you are minister, and there is no magic wand for this question that you put. I remember late President Nyerere, that was very, very angry because the per diem in Arusha process were paid by in a Western Scandinavian country out of the control of the mediator. And this is not possible. Of course, it's not very wise. By then, I think that first of all, it's true what the minister was saying, that neighbor countries know better, but in the same time, neighbor countries are suspected to have interest in an agenda just because they are, precisely because they are neighbor countries. There is not a magic wand. We have to play a mixture of participation of the neighbor countries or the friends, and also people from outside that can be perceived like an arbiter, like someone less involved. We need a mixture. There is no magic wand exactly in this, but in fact, those are the problems of a mediation, and a mediation is every time is a process. It's not a model that you can repeat every time as equal. It's a process. It has to be tuned with the reality of the field, and it changed. Even if you can try, you can imagine that is the similar. There are similarities with another crisis. Generally speaking, is never the case.
Thank you very much. And Steinar, for you, the floor is yours to the question. Have you heard it?
Yes. So I think that you are right, and I experience very often that the associations people have to dialogue can be very strange, and particularly this dialogue as some cozy talk, you know, that somehow you go to the beach and you are friends. That maybe can work in some, let's say, high school, but in real conflicts, I have spent 3-4 years to motivate people to even participate in the dialogue. But the dialogue is about understanding why maybe we disagree so much. And mediation, then there is some goal in terms of wanting to reach or move closer to where is the fence going to be. While in the dialogue, you absolutely we don't even need to deal with where the fence is going to be. I have participated in seminars in Norway where we have decided, 3-day seminar, we are not going to talk about solutions. We are inviting everybody that have interests in this particular conflict. In Norway, it's often about reindeers or salmon or wolves. So it's about animals, strange country I live in. But bringing people together, then you have a background to find solutions at a later stage through mediation or even through negotiation. But this notion about negotiation that we have heard now the last few months in Ukraine, I also react to, that people are coming with preconditions. The point of a negotiation is, of course, that you sit down and you look at from different angles, and to enter a negotiation does not mean at all that you approve of the preconditions of the other party. But both, it's okay that they somehow show their expectations, but the process of negotiation can change something that none of them foresaw. I just wanted to mention, I'm doing a promotion, the Back channel. It's a book by the head of the CIA. He says the reason we are now in such deep shit is we have completely neglected diplomacy the last 20 years. In Europe, we defend our diplomacy. We somehow say we did our best. It wasn't good enough. But we need to strengthen. And I think this, Tatar, this is a challenge for the alliance of dialogue. That if the contribution that we can give, if we approach national leaders, United Nations, it is simply this message that diplomacy has declined also in Europe. We need to strengthen it in order to deal with also what Mario was talking about, you know, the ongoing wars that become frozen conflicts instead of moving toward peace.
Thank you very much. Yes, you are right. And this is one of the reasons why we do support, and I myself was one of the authors of this idea that we need to do something more for promoting dialogue, for explaining people what we understand under dialogue, why dialogue is necessary, and so on. And let me ask Victoria. Victoria, can we prolong our record? So it is not technically no problem with this.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I was asking myself the same question. Now it's recording.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I can extend it, but I'm not sure I can keep it recorded. I'm not sure how Zoom works. So.
Oh, okay. But try. If necessary, please try to extend it, and then we shall see. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So look, then in this case, let's make a risk. Anybody else does have any question or any comment, and then I will try to introduce and to present the idea, this alliance of dialogue. But I don't want that people come here and then just listen. Anybody, please, has any question, feel free to raise hands and pose the question or make a comment. Okay. Look, in this.
Josh,
yes,
there is,
go ahead.
There is Josh Nado as his hand up.
Josh? I don't see it. Josh, go ahead. Josh.
I see it.
Okay. Sorry, I don't see he. Okay. No, Josh, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I had an interesting. It was very interesting hearing about the conversation about extremism versus polarization in the German context, and I just wanted to comment that I work both in the Russian-Ukrainian context, but also in the North American context with polarization, and also been involved in research into how this may impact attempts to dialogue, especially in this kind of culture war setting that people talk about in the United States and in Canada. And it's interesting because I think there's such a need for maybe networks like this to talk about the regional context, because while maybe in Germany, there's a need to step back from this talk about left-wing extremism. It's almost like America and Canada has only just rediscovered that left-wing extremism exists. And so in this context, like it used to be almost taken for granted that the right wing was the problem and that the left wing is okay. But now there's a conversation that actually is just the fact that mainstream institutions have more institutionalized, more liberal left-wing values. And so we're not even neutral in the process, and we need to recognize how things are from the other side. And so for me, like, it's really great to hear from other contexts just to kind of complete the picture, and how something that's progress in our context, realizing that something exists, might be actually regression in another context. And so for me, that's definitely a value, something that I took from today. Also, another comment about some of what Steiner was talking about. It's interesting because just from conversations that I've had with him and with some other people in the same room, it seems like there's such a need for more communication and more dialogue between local practitioners in Ukraine and international practitioners, because sometimes it seems like we're speaking in very different languages with very different paradigms. And Steiner was speaking about the need for the helicopter view. And it's interesting because both the helicopter view and the local view are so necessary, and they each see things that the other does not. And so for me, it seems like, I don't know, if this platform keeps going forward, it'd be really great, for example, to find ways to bridge that gap between international and local, because this is like, people, I don't know, I've been hearing a lot of the same arguments going back and forth for a year and a half, and there's been no real progress in many ways. And so for me, it would be really interesting to see if this platform might have something to offer with that. And for example, international and Ukrainian dialogue might be more accessible first start, rather than like Ukraine and Russian dialogue, even though that will be definitely also necessary. So those were just two comments I had. Thank you. Yeah,
I just want to add to that, Josh, because Josh was witnessing just a few nights ago. I'm sitting with a Ukrainian. We are communicating hours after hours, two nights in a row. And the value of a dialogue conversation, where there is almost an underlying agreement that we are not going to reach some agreement, but we both realize that we are now standing so far apart that the international community, we need to rebuild some trust and faith in us and our willingness to contribute in a meaningful way. And this is the reason, Tatar, why I didn't say so much about Ukraine. I didn't feel that I wanted to sit here and talk about something on behalf of them. So I kind of lowered it down, and instead I'm focusing on how we in the West have failed. And one suggestion you had, Josh, I think this is an initiative we can act upon. How to improve the communication between Western dialogue workers and the dialogue community in Ukraine, because there is a lot of good people in Ukraine and they can do a lot of good work. It's not that we don't see that, but there is again these other experiences we have from a lot of wars in Europe throughout. So there is a basis for togetherness.
Thank you very much, Steinar. I think that this would take some more time to explain these situations and the background. Let me go very quickly to our last. Liberata, did you want something to say? No. Okay, good. So let me very shortly present. This is the last point of our agenda today. This draft statement, what we have drafted, and what is practically an initiative which is aimed to disseminate the culture of dialogue, to make it as a organic part of the governance, to create and enhance the cohesion of the international dialogue community, and also to standardize the dialogue, the development, building up dialogue capabilities at national level. So this sounds very horizontally what I meant, but and let me if I will go just very shortly to the points of the statement without presenting them completely, just some remarks to that. What we have had problems before. Firstly, we have had a basic problem with the terminology, and as Liberata has mentioned, we need to explain and to make a distinction between a chat, a communication, between mediation, between negotiation, and so on. But also within dialogue, there are some distinctions, and we need to be very clear that we want to develop dialogue and promote the culture of dialogue, which is aimed at exploring the views of the others. What do you think? What are your motivations? What is your background? What are your feelings? Because that will help if you will be able to understand the point of the others, then that would help you to think about, okay, what we can do to live in peace with each other also, although we have thought before that we are just deadly enemies. So that was one of the points of the terminology, and we didn't find the correct terminology. So that was one of the most crucial point, that we thought about controversial dialogue, conflictual dialogue, bridging dialogue, depolarizing dialogue, sustainable dialogue, as Harald said, preventive dialogue, exploratory dialogue. So therefore, any sort of help in this field, what you think would very clearly explain to the outside world what we mean under dialogue, that would be very helpful in the future if you could give some suggestions. So that this is one point. The second point was about the tasks. What we have written. The tasks were about including dialogue as an additional structure in the decision-making processes, be it diplomacy at the highest level, or the decision-making procedure at the community level in a country. So therefore, that's what we need to institutionalize, to create some specific structure and include it in the decision-making process. And because practically the diplomats, and Mario knows it excellently, the diplomats represent the views of their countries, of their governments. Their hands are tied up, so they need to push their views. While during dialogue, you just try to understand what the other says. Of course, during an informal lunch or dinner, diplomats can also clear the points of each other informally. But even there, you cannot do that. So therefore, we need to create a so-called, I called it, or we called it, entry hall. That the idea of Steinar was backdoor room, where people without, and not necessarily diplomats, but experts in the given country, representing different views, would come together and would explain to each other without any concrete mandate what they think is the problem, what they do think about the situation. And at the end of the day, and of course this will not be a one day dialogue, it will be a maybe even 1 month, maybe 2 months long period, while they will try to clarify the points, clarify the positions, and then they could make a summary and put these summaries about the conflicting points to the table of the diplomats, of the negotiators, or in the case of a community, to the municipality leaders, and say that that's what we discovered, that this is the problem, and please take it into account when you will start negotiating the problem, trying to find the solutions. And in the case, of course, in the case of dialogue, we do know, and also as Steinar said, that sometimes you cannot even bring together the people who are in conflict with each other. So even if that would be a difficulty, but should we have such a structure, then probably you could extend an invitation to anybody and say, look, this is a legal structure. You can come here and you can just express your views free of any obligations, any mandate, and so on. So this is the basic idea that we, during this institutionalization, we would like to set up new structures in the decision-making processes. And that definitely, it would be also important that we try to include dialogue as a topic in the national educational curriculum. Why? Because until now, we can make some civil organizations, some projects, and go to a high school and explain the culture of dialogue, or go to even a university. But what we need is that this dialogue, the education of this culture, this will become a basic cornerstone of national education. Otherwise, all our efforts will remain as it is, an isolated effort. So these are the main, considerations lying behind the tasks. Obviously, the roadmap should be flexible. So we had to set up some deadlines for discussions, reflections, and so on. But definitely, what we want is that we shall present this statement, which will have to be discussed. I will come back to that later on. To the highest level of the multilateral forum. For example, we wrote that with United Nations. We also could present our ideas to the regional organizations like OSCE, or like the African Union, or any other organization. And then through them, we could explain also to the governments what we mean under dialogue, and why it would be necessary to include this institution, this structure, in the decision-making processes. So we are flexible with this. And definitely, one last point about our dilemmas is that I do think, and we thought, that we do something new. We do make some innovations. But please warn us if anybody knows that there is going on some parallel, some similar effort in the world. And then in this case, just warn us that not to do something, not to duplicate these sort of efforts, which we shall have to avoid any application. What we do want is to create synergies. Synergies, firstly, between and among the so-called dialogue practitioners, and therefore we want to establish the so-called Alliance for Dialogue. And then we want to create synergies between different efforts which aim the same, to help people better understand each other, to help people talk to each other, to communicate with each other, even if they think that there is no way for communication. And then this culture will be more in a more focused way and a more centralized way be disseminated and probably made over time. It will take long years, I'm sure, that we shall be able to push it through and to implement it. So of course I could say and I could speak a lot about this, but lack of time doesn't allow me, and lack of your patience doesn't allow me either to do that. But please, my request would be the following. First of all, I have circulated this statement. Please feel free to feedback bilaterally and to make any comment on it. Secondly, feel free, if you want, circulate your ideas and within this circle, and then also please try to help us collect and compile a list of people whom you know that these people make regular dialogue facilitation in the world, in various setups, just to help to mobilize them, to take them on board as well, because sooner or later this paper will have to be somehow signed up, agreed and signed up with people, with the dialogue practitioners. Otherwise, it will remain the paper of 2-3 people and nobody will take it seriously. So that's what we want to prevent, and that's what we would like to do in the future. The next point will be that we shall give time for you and also for the others to think about the paper, about the ideas, and about making about any comment. And I plan that in the end of August, we shall probably make a new webinar, mainly for those who have made feedback on the paper and who are really interested in this. And then we shall try to also compile the list of dialogue practitioners. So please, right now you still have time for us to say a few words, to say comments. Whether you like this idea at all, you think it's a small stupidity, something which is not necessary, we shall have to give up very honestly. None of us has so much time that we deal with things which are not necessary. But definitely, if you think so that this is necessary, then let's do it together and let's work together and let's try to promote this culture in the future. And not only the culture, the institutionalization of the culture. And this is the basic difference between our effort and the efforts in the past, if I know it well and if I have all the necessary information on that. So the floor is yours. Thank you for your attention.
So good. You want us to comment now, or you want?
Yeah, you
want us
can.
to
Please
read
go
the
ahead.
text?
You can. Yes, please.
No, I wish to commend you for that initiative, but I'm also happy that we have practitioners on this webinar, including Steiner. Steiner, apart from being involved in the all processes in Ukraine and before, but you also come from Norway. I was in Norway 2 weeks ago for the Oslo Forum. They were celebrating 20 years of the Oslo Forum. I'm sure you are aware of it, and George, you know Oslo Forum. Although Mario was telling us that you cannot be a professional mediator, but that Oslo Forum brings all those people who have been in mediation, they have aged in mediation. But then when we were looking for solutions, nobody had an answer, a breakthrough. So why I'm bringing this, I said there are these various platforms which we could also bring them, stock of the synergies, because everyone is promoting dialogue, either through mediation or negotiation, but the key is dialogue. So on that, because that is still fresh in my mind, I thought we could see how we can connect. I know it's not twice, but it's good. But also on the African scene, and that's where most also the negotiations dialogue continues. And institution, although Mario said they are non-institutional mediators, but they have become institutionalized, sort of, because they have been involved in many, and I've been also engaging them in especially on various levels, including the International Year of Peace, which also promotes dialogue, interfaith-based dialogue. So what is key here is that each and every one of us, especially who participated in this and those who are there to see how we can be able to get to form these synergies, but also use this platform. Because this, I take it as a platform which can bring in those who are already participating in the negotiation dialogue, but also to get also others to really understand the importance of dialogue, that it should not be restricted to only a few, but be an open-ended platform that each one can participate without any inhibitions. And how you can use, for example, me, I got a lot of things, new things, ideas to be able to continue pushing for dialogue in our Great Lakes region. So I thought these are my preliminary, but once I read the statement, I'll come up with some specifics. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Liberata. Okay, Harald, please go ahead.
Just 2 or 3 sentences, also because I unfortunately have to leave, but just to make that very clear, Georgie, I fully support and see a huge resource in that, whatever shape it's going to take on. You know, I mean, from here where you have such a diversity of practitioners of dialogue, ranging from, you know, geopolitical diplomacy to classroom or educational activities, maybe even out with some therapeutic aspect to it, and to have that reference point is very important. You know, where we go with that, which kind of, you know, to what extent we meet regularly, what time we can feed into all that, how we maybe assist with other projects that are funded, build synergies, and that's all open. And as you mentioned, we have to be all quite careful to, to get everything done we want to. But I sure want this to be there, and keep continuing also to get people from the German Prevent program and from the ministries to, recognize us and maybe contribute here. So very well done. But I'll be with you anytime, and I think we should continue. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Harald. Josh, I see your hands are raised, but I don't see your face. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I actually have a question. I think that the vision is very cool, and if some kind of network that connects different practitioners and different institutions develops, that's something that's very exciting. And I'm curious to the practitioners who've been working in the field for a while. Have things like this been attempted in the past? And if so, what were some of the barriers? Like, it seems like such an obvious thing to do. And I'm curious, like, why do we think this hasn't already been attempted, or what might have been some barriers that prevented this from happening in the past? Thank you.
Do you expect from me?
I can give you a quick question, Georgie, if
Okay,
I
go
may,
ahead.
because Josh, that made me think back on 2011 and 12 when we been addressed by the European Commission as practitioners in Germany that had a relatively developed network already in terms of practicing what's been called preventing violent extremism. Or to make a long story short, I think what we can maybe do better, or what we could contribute, is a practitioner network or resource that is definitely non-governmental. I've learned over the last 15 years the pitfalls of doing any of that work under governmental or supernatural auspices, and basically very often been attached to departments of Interior, Ministers of Interior, the Commission of Interior, which is where the security agencies are. Make a long story very short. I mean, it ended up not being able to be published there with certain conclusions, and we don't want that. And I mean, if this needs to be confidential, independent. It may be an association, but it must be an independent civil society association that does not answer to any state or any government and agencies.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. So this is also written there that this should be basically an alliance of civil practitioners. At the same time, we shall have the target group are the politicians. So even internationally or domestically. And Josh, the idea is that there has been that I myself, when I have talked with different practitioners, and I learned a lot how much they do in Colombia, in Tunis, in Morocco, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then I realized that, look, these are fragmented, isolated, selected activities, and people do not know about each other. Of course, if you click Google Dialogue, then you can find a lot of people, you can find a lot of resources, but still, these people, they understand what dialogue is, but the vast majority of the people in the world, they don't understand what we mean under dialogue. And that's will have to be, how to say, explained, not just in an isolated way by each of us during some exercises, some dialogue facilitation exercises, but it has to be systematized, and it has to be, if we push it through, to include this in the dialogue decision-making procedure. Then that's what we could reach the best. And until now, so far I know, nobody has come to this idea that we bring together and connect the dialogue practitioners in the international arena, and we have to do that. So until now I haven't heard about it, but sometime somebody will have to start it, and so we have started it. So that's it. Was that your question, Josh?
Yes, and definitely, like, there for one, there is that, but then also what might be some of the barriers, and some other speakers also addressed that. It totally slipped my mind, but there is also the mediation support network, which is actually growing. I don't know if you know about that, or if there's some kind of difference between the vision you're thinking and what they do, because they're also like now a global network of different dialogue and mediation and negotiation organizations that might be doing something similar, but I'm not sure.
So far I know, there is a basic difference between dialogue and mediation, and that's what we have to make very clear. So you can mediate between people who are, let's say, so in conflict, in war, and they just you convince them to put down the guns, and then you start exploring what the other side wants, this side what the other side wants, and then you can reach an agreement between them. You can mediate a peace accord between them. In the case of dialogue, you help people to reconcile their feelings, to recognize that they can live together even across the divide between the views, and sometimes even you will not arrive at any consensus of the problem between them. But these people in the future, after this dialogue process, they will have the possibility, they will to talk to each other, to communicate with each other, so that you have demounted the walls of communication between them, which over time, maybe over years, will inspire them. Okay, let's come together again and let's discuss things, and then they will come at a consensus. So while mediation would definitely arrive at some accord, of course, if it is successful. But in the case of dialogue, you try just to bring together the people as human beings. As Steinar said, it may take sometimes years that you bring them together and convince them to sit together around one table and start talking with each other without the wish to agree on anything. So, of course, I can explain it further, but I don't want to take your precious time on that. And maybe I'm not the best person who explains what the hell is this dialogue. But just I wanted to point to some moments and some maybe differences between mediation and dialogue and so on. So that's.
I have to leave you. Thank you, Georg.
Thank you very much.
everybody.
Look, I would like to ask, first of all, to say thank you, all of you, for participation, for contributions, for inputs. And I do hope that this is not the last time that we see each other and we work each other. We shall put the record of this event on the website. I will share it. Not only among those who have participated in the event today, but also among the all invitees. And then, if you will have the time to share it within your network, please do it. And I will try to drive further together with Steinar, together with Harald, and all with others who will join us. The idea of this alliance for dialogue. And thank you very much. And I wish you a nice evening, maybe a nice day to some people from the USA, and a nice holiday season. And I will contact you later on in written format. Thank you very much.